Good evening. The essential facts are these. President Kennedy was murdered in Dallas, Texas. He was shot by a sniper hiding in a building near his parade route. He was dead within an hour. Lyndon Johnson is President of the United States. He took the oath of office in a jet airplane as he was returning from Dallas, where he went with Mr. Kennedy, coming back to Washington, where he is now. The late President's body has been returned here and arrived along with Mrs. Kennedy and President Johnson a short time ago. They came into Andrews Air Force Base just outside of Washington. Then President Johnson took a helicopter, flew to the White House, and went into a meeting immediately with the Secretary of Defense, McNamara, and McGeorge Bundy, who is the President's advisor on foreign policy. They will be meeting for some time, and now here was the scene at Andrews Air Force Base as recorded by NBC's television cameras a few minutes ago on videotape.
It looks as if it's bronze.
The honor guard slowly marches away from the plane, leaving room for the elevator-like apparatus that is now being lowered. Seems to have gotten stuck. The apparatus is coming down now.
A Navy ambulance is being drawn up just near the truck which lowered the casket from the plane. It is our understanding here that the body will be flown by helicopter from here, possibly to Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Other senators have reported that the body will be taken by helicopter straight to the White House. There is some difference of opinion as to the exact plans. Behind the casket is Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy. To her right is her brother-in-law, the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy. They are helping her down out of that carrier that has just brought down the casket.
Mrs. Kennedy is apparently getting into the ambulance, the Navy ambulance, with the casket.
It was a very steep step that she had to jump down to get on the floor. Aides helped her do it. She was helped also by her brother-in-law, the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy.
President Lyndon Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson are standing just near the door in the rear of the presidential jet, waiting. The ambulance moving past the guard of honor, a cordon of soldiers, airmen lining the field here, and behind them thousands of young airmen from Andrews Air Force Base who have come here up to the fence to see.
The Secret Service man comes down the steps of the airplane. Now, new President Lyndon Baines Johnson with his wife, Lady Bird. They're coming down the steps. They are followed by Johnson aides, including Mrs. Carpenter, Mr. Bill Moyers, former Congressman Homer Thornberry.
It's the head of the Secret Service on the president's right. Secretary McNamara and other officials greeting the new president. As he moves now in the direction of an Army helicopter.
That was Secretary McNamara, I think, who just leaned over and affectionately kissed Mrs. Johnson. We have heard that Lyndon Johnson, the new president, was going to make a speech here tonight on arrival. The microphones are set up. He appears to be walking toward them now. These microphones are just about 4 feet back from an encased area for the press.
This is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God's.
Those were Mr. Johnson's first public words as President of the United States on videotape by NBC from Andrews Air Force Base, made a few minutes ago with Robert Abernathy and Nancy Dickerson. Chet?
Here is a picture of the swearing-in of the 36th President of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson. We understand that he was sworn in during the sad flight back to Washington from Dallas. On the right of your screen, you see Mrs. Kennedy, President Johnson, and Mrs. Johnson. He was sworn in by Federal District Judge Hughes of Dallas, Texas, so we are given to understand. The assassination took place in Dallas as President Kennedy rode in a cavalcade toward the Trade Mart where he was to have luncheon and make a speech. This is what happened, beginning shortly before the shots were fired. The voice is that of Charles Murphy of station WBAP, Fort Worth.
This was the scene near the Stemmons Expressway. This is in front of City Hall in downtown Dallas, a mile east of the shooting scene. Heavy crowds line the downtown streets to view the presidential party. As in all of the Texas stops, there were many teenagers attracted there by the First Lady and the President. This is Main Street in Dallas. Is this moving west? This is moving west toward the fatal moment. The motorcade is traveling at about 20 to 25 miles an hour, slowly westward down Main Street in the heart of Dallas. The time, about 12:20. During the noon hour, heavy crowds from downtown offices lining the route. That looks like the school depository building on the right. I'm not sure. This is the scene of confusion. Something has happened here. The cameraman running toward the scene to the presidential car ahead of him. We caught just a blurred glance of the old-school depository building from which the sniper fired the shot. This is the reaction from the crowd. All is confusion at the scene. Here a woman shelters herself. Now racing toward the hospital. On Stemmons Freeway, past the trademark to the right where the president was to have spoken, where he was to have criticized the fanatical right. There, a picket. That is Parkland Hospital, 1.5 miles to 2 miles from the shooting scene. Parkland Hospital, where the president died, in Dallas. By the time these films were shot, of course, the presidential car was already at the hospital. This is Major General Clifton, the military aide of the president, press secretary going into the hospital.
That was silent film of the events along the presidential line of ride, immediately surrounding the fatal moment and described later by reporter Murphy. Thousands had massed 10 and 12 deep along the curb to see the President of the United States. The assassination happened so swiftly, and the motorcade sped off so quickly that few saw it actually taking place. A Dallas man had taken his small son to see the President. Here he tells what he saw.
Unfortunately, I was probably 15 to 20 feet away from the president when it happened.
Tell us exactly what you saw, sir.
He was coming down the street, and my 5-year-old boy and myself were by ourselves on the grass there on Palmer Street, and I asked Joe to wave to him, and Joe waved, and I waved, and the man...
That's all right, sir. You go ahead and tell it.
As he was waving back, he was the shot rang out, and he slumped down in the seat, and his wife reached up toward him, and as he was slumping down, and the second shot went off, and it just knocked him down from the seat. Two shots. Two shots.
Did you see the man who did this?
No, sir, I did not see the man who did it. All I did was look in the man's face when he was shot there and saw that expression on his face and grab himself and slide. And the second one, whenever it went, why, I'm positive it had hit him. I hope it didn't, but I'm positive that it hit him, and he went all the way down in the car. Then they speeded up, and I didn't know what was going on, so I just grabbed the boy and fell on him in the hopes that there wasn't a maniac around. I'm sorry. I can't help you more, but I won't forget it.
It's a logical assumption that hatred, far left, far right, political, religious, economic, or paranoid, moved the person or persons who today committed this combined act of murder and national sabotage. There is in this country, and there has been for too long, an ominous and sickening popularity of hatred. The body of the president lying at this moment in Washington is the thundering testimonial of what hatred comes to and the revolting excesses it perpetrates. Hatred is self-generating, contagious. It feeds upon itself and explodes into violence. It is no inexplicable phenomenon that there are pockets of hatred in our country, areas and communities where the disease is permitted or encouraged or given status by those who can and do influence others. You and I have heard in recent months someone say, those Kennedys ought to be shot. A well-known national magazine recently carried an article saying Chief Justice Warren should be hanged. In its own defense, it said it was only joking, but the left has been equally bad. Tonight, it might be the hope and the resolve of all of us that we've heard the last of this kind of talk, jocular or serious, for the result is tragically the same. David?
The news reached the White House, which was almost empty at the time, on the news wires, and during the day, the Army has been there helping to make the funeral arrangements. Members of Vice President's, now President, Lyndon Johnson's staff have been there making other arrangements. NBC Robert Goralski has been there all day, and here is his report on what has happened at the White House.
It was about 1:30 this afternoon here at the White House. It was virtually deserted. Most members of the staff were with the president in Texas. Two secretaries, Helen Gans and Nancy Larson, were sitting in the press office opening routine mail. The phone rang. It was a news agency asking permission to have one of its reporters, who didn't have a White House press pass, to enter the executive mansion. One of the girls said, "Why? Nothing's happening here." At the other end of the line, the voice said, "Because the president's been shot." The girls raced into a small cubicle where the teletype printers were clattering. There was the bulletin confirming what they had just heard. The highest-ranking remaining members of the White House staff were immediately informed, George Bundy and Ted Sorensen. They tried to call Dallas, but it was impossible. Like the rest of the nation, they sat, unbelieving and shocked, watching television and listening to radio reports on what was happening. There was a prayerful silence as White House staffers, newsmen, and photographers began the long vigil. There was nothing that could be done in the presidential mansion. When word was flashed that the president was dead, there was no rush for phones. There was only the quiet of mourning and still disbelief. Only when the American flag was lowered to half-staff was there mournful recognition that it was true. On the second floor of the executive mansion, 6-year-old Caroline and 3-year-old John Jr. were napping. They'd had their lunch, Caroline after attending morning classes in the White House first grade. They still don't know that their father is dead. Two of Lyndon Johnson's aides arrived at the White House early this afternoon, presumably to prepare for the transition. Senator Edward Kennedy and Eunice Shriver, the president's brother and sister, came to the White House and then took off for Hyannisport to be with their parents. Newsmen crowded around the White House, getting details on the funeral arrangements which were being taken care of by the late president's brother-in-law, Sergeant Shriver. Then there was more waiting for the new president of the United States to begin his duties. Robert Goralski, NBC News at the White House.
A funeral mass will be said. All of the funeral arrangements, as Robert Goralski has reported, are not complete, but a funeral mass will be said Monday in the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception here in Washington for the president by Richard Cardinal Cushing of Boston. During the day, General Eisenhower, when he got the news, was interviewed briefly by reporters. So here we go now to General Eisenhower and a brief interview with reporters this evening.
I share the sense of shock and dismay that the entire nation must feel at the despicable act that took the life of the nation's president. On the personal side, Mrs. Eisenhower and I share the grief that Mrs. Kennedy must now feel. And we send to her our prayerful thoughts and sympathetic sentiments in this hour.
General, how would you counsel the American people at this time?
In the face of such a terrible thing, I'm sure the entire citizenry of the nation will join as one man in expressing not only their grief but their indignation at this act, and will stand faithfully behind the government.
General, could you tell us how you got the word?
I was at a meeting for the United Nations, and while there, a member of the meeting was called out and came back and told us the news. Although at that time, we did not know the president was dead. We did not know when I got back here at that time that he was dead. But, matter of fact, we had the last message we had was one rather of hope. And the entire company merely paused for a minute at the request of the chairman, and each of us, in his own way, said a silent prayer for the president.
Should there be any concern, sir, over national security at a time like this?
No, I think the whole nation now would be almost all of us security agents.
General, will the nation be all right in the few months ahead?
Oh, I'm not going to predict anything of that. I just say this. The American nation is a people of great common sense, and they are not going to be stampeded or bewildered.
Thank you, Mr. President. History has had a...
None of us will ever forget where he was and how he felt when the news was announced. In New York City, for a handful of people, the place was the sidewalk beside the open door of NBC News reporter Gabe Pressman's automobile, listening to the loudspeaker of the car radio. They had known for some minutes that the president was gravely wounded. Then came the instant when the worst was confirmed.
A flash from Dallas. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds. This is the latest information we have from Dallas. Of course, standing by to give you all available information as it comes to us. I will repeat with the greatest regret this flash. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he has died of bullet wounds.
Find it hard to believe.
Two sources.
Please go ahead. It's hard to believe it.
Hard to believe it's right. I don't know what to say.
Press Secretary.
Well, I know whoever catches them, they deserve the worst. 5 years old.
During a motorcade drive through downtown Dallas.
The president died.
The president died.
Approximately 25 minutes.
Others, there was a stunned silence and a groping to come to terms with a fact that was almost beyond belief. The face and voice of a young girl summed it up.
Bleeding and unconscious.
The Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas.
Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas.
What's your feeling right now?
I really couldn't say. Really, right now I just don't know what to do. I don't even know where to go, what to say. There's nothing for me to say.
It was much the same all across the country, a wave of shock. Here is Chicago at the same hour. Floyd Kalber reports from NBC News, Chicago.
Ask him for sound and picture. In Chicago, gray clouds hung low and a fine drizzle of rain fell when the first word of the tragedy was heard. Learning that the president was critically wounded, stunned Chicagoans turned to their churches, leaving their offices in the Loop, their homes and businesses in the suburbs. When confirmation came a short while later that the president's wounds were fatal, the grief of the mourners became more evident in tears, looks of dazed disbelief. In some churches, priests and ministers took to the pulpit to offer eulogies and lead their congregations in prayer. In most cases, the churches were simply open as a haven for those wishing to add their prayers to the millions of others around the world, to recite the rosary, or simply to light a candle. Floyd Kalber, NBC News, Chicago.
In Washington, where everything revolves around the government, this is a company town, really, and where the president is more than any one person revolves around him, and where in many cases the grief today was personal among people who knew him and worked for him. Here are a few pictures, rather random in nature, of some of the sights around Washington today. Flags on embassies as well as on all other public buildings at half-staff. That, incidentally, is the Russian embassy. This is Lafayette Park, immediately across Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House, where as soon as the first news came out, people began to gather and stand, as they often do, just stand. The police roped off the sidewalk immediately in front of the White House. St. Matthew's Cathedral is a few blocks from the White House.
I rushed up to the chair and said, Senator, Senator Kennedy, your brother, the president, has been shot. He gave a jerk to his body tensed, but he was absolutely calm. And as I recall, Senator Kennedy, then presiding over the Senate, when he heard this awful news, said no. And that was all.
That was Robert Riddell, a member of the staff of the U.S. Senate, who took the news here to Senator Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, who is here with his sister Eunice, leaving in a helicopter for Andrews Base, where they then took a jet plane to Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts. Now some comments from members of the Senate.
We knew him and loved him in West Virginia. I think he loved us. Mountaineers can hardly express their sadness at his going, and this afternoon I hope in just these few rather faltering words I can speak, at least in part, for the people of my state.
This good, this decent, this kindly man, this harassed man who had so much on his shoulders and received from some people so little in the way of support in return, this man has now gone to his reward.
There are some things that are simply incredible and leave one absolutely speechless. This is one of them.
The assassin's bullet has removed from the most vital station on a brilliant and dedicated young statesman at the very height of his powers. And I know that all Americans, no matter where they come from or how they are made in God's fashion, will rally in support behind the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson.
Those are comments from members of the Senate, both parties. Chet?
Dallas police are holding a suspect in the president's assassination, 24-year-old Lee H. Oswald. Shortly after the president and Governor Connally were shot, police chased Oswald into a movie theater. Police said he fired at them, killing patrolman J.D. Tippett. A rifle was found in a building where he worked. Oswald once served in the United States Marines. In 1959, he was in Moscow, where he said he wanted to become a Russian citizen, saying that leaving this country was like getting out of a prison. But last summer, he was back in the United States. In New Orleans, police arrested him after he got into a fight while distributing literature for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, an organization that at least sympathizes with the Castro government. At that time, Oswald was interviewed by station WDSU-TV in New Orleans.
President Johnson's statement at Andrews, and have it ready to go during your last spot, if you want to place it in there somewhere.
All right.
Well, as you can see, we lost the audio portion of the interview. The boy said that he was a Marxist, not a communist. Perhaps a little later in the program we can try to run the film again. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was 46 years old last May. He had been president since January 20th, 1961. He was born to wealth. He was devoted to the public service. Not unlike thousands of others, John F. Kennedy experienced the pain, the boredom, the moments of combat, fear, and came home a lean and lanky war hero with a history degree from Harvard and a quickly demonstrated talent for politics. He won his contest for a seat in the 80th Congress in 1946 and served 3 terms in the House. In 1952, he challenged incumbent Henry Cabot Lodge, Jr. and won his place in the Senate. The nation was first aware of John F. Kennedy at the Democratic Convention in 1956, when he lost the vice presidential nomination. Then came 1960, Senator Kennedy's announcement of candidacy. the primary campaigns in Wisconsin and West Virginia, the convention in Los Angeles featuring a public debate with his arch-rival, Senator, now President Lyndon Johnson, and the surprise announcement that Senator Johnson would join Kennedy on the Democratic ticket. Then there was the campaign, the innovation of the famous Kennedy-Nixon debates, the long, excruciating hours of election night with the Kennedy family gathered in the big frame house on Cape Cod. One by one, cabinet officers were announced, the inauguration came and went, and the administration of John F. Kennedy began with these inaugural words. Christ. Here is the inauguration speech, excerpts from it.
We observe today not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom, symbolizing an end as well as a beginning, signifying renewal as well as change. For I have sworn before you and Almighty God the same solemn oath our forebears prescribed nearly a century and 3/4 ago. The world is very different now, for man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. And yet the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. The belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. We dare not forget today that we are the heirs of that first revolution. Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the small undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed and to which we are committed today at home and around the world. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This much we pledge and more. To those old allies whose cultural and spiritual origins we share, we pledge the loyalty of faithful friends. United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do, or we dare not meet a powerful challenge at all and split asunder. To those new states whom we welcome to the ranks of the free, we pledge our word that one form of colonial control shall not have passed away, merely to be replaced by a far more iron tyranny. We shall not always expect to find them supporting our view, but we shall always hope to find them strongly supporting their own freedom, and to remember that in the past, Those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside. To those people in the huts and villages across the globe struggling to break the bonds of mass misery, we pledge our best efforts to help them help themselves. For whatever period is required, not because the communists may be doing it, not because we seek their votes, but because it is right. If a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. To our sister republics south of our border, we offer a special pledge to convert our good words into good deeds, in a new alliance for progress, to assist free men and free government in casting off the chains of poverty. But this peaceful revolution of hope cannot become the prey of hostile powers. Let all our neighbors know that we shall join with them to oppose aggression or subversion anywhere in the Americas. And let every other power know that this hemisphere intends to remain the master of its own house. To that World Assembly of Sovereign States, the United Nations, our last best hope, in an age where the instruments of war have far outpaced the instruments of peace, we renew our pledge of support to prevent it from becoming merely a forum for invective, to strengthen its shield of the new and the weak, and to enlarge the area in which its writ may run. Finally, for those nations who would make themselves our adversary, we offer not a pledge, but a request that both sides begin anew the quest for peace. Before the dark powers of destruction, unleashed by science, engulf all humanity in planned or accidental self-destruction. We dare not tempt them with weakness, for only when our arms are sufficient beyond doubt can we be certain beyond doubt that they will never be employed. But neither can two great and powerful groups of nations take comfort from our present course, both sides overburdened by the cost of modern weapons, both rightly alarmed by the steady spread of the deadly atom, yet both racing to alter that uncertain balance of terror that stays the hand of mankind's final war. So let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness, and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Let both sides explore what problems unite us, instead of belaboring those problems which divide us. Let both sides, for the first time, formulate serious and precise proposals for the inspection and control of arms, and bring the absolute power to destroy other nations under the absolute control of all nations. Let both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars, conquer the desert, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depths and encourage the arts and commerce. Let both sides unite to heed in all corners of the earth the command of Isaiah to undo the heavy burdens and let the oppressed go free. And if a beachhead of cooperation may push back the jungle of suspicion, let both sides join in creating a new endeavor, not a new balance of power, but a new world of law, where the strong are just and the weak secure and the peace preserved. All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin. In your hands, my fellow citizens, more than mine, will rest the final success or failure of our cause. Since this country was founded, each generation of Americans has been summoned to give testimony to its national loyalty. The graves of young Americans who answered the call to service around the globe. Now the trumpet summons us again, not as a call to bear arms, though arms we need, not as a call to battle, though in battle we are, but a call to bear the burden of a long twilight struggle, year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. Can we forge against these enemies a grand and global alliance, north and south, east and west, that can assure a more fruitful life for all mankind? Will you join in that historic effort? In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us here the same high standard of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own.
That was the inaugural speech of John F. Kennedy, January 1961. Crises were not long delayed. Precisely 3 months after entering the White House, the President stood before the nation to acknowledge the Bay of Pigs fiasco. There followed the first trip to Europe and an inconclusive meeting with Khrushchev in Vienna. The Berlin issue grew more intense through those summer weeks of 1961. And on the night of August 12th, the Communists built the Berlin Wall, and the President elected not to respond with force. A few days later, on August 16th, the Alliance for Progress was announced in the White House before a gathering of Latin American diplomats. In December, the President paid a visit to Latin America. 1962 is the year of trial. In April, the President faced off with the steel industry and a sizable section of the American business community. That autumn, a Negro youth by the name of James Meredith attempted to enter the University of Mississippi, and it required the action of the President to get him in and keep him there safely. In October, President Kennedy issued notice on Premier Khrushchev to remove his missiles and other big weapons from Cuba. The President led us to look for a few hours squarely at the possibility of nuclear war with these words.
Only last Thursday, as evidence of this rapid offensive buildup was already in my hand, Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko told me in my office that he was instructed to make it clear once again, as he said his government had already done, that Soviet assistance to Cuba, and I quote, pursued solely the purpose of contributing to the defense capabilities of Cuba, unquote. That, and I quote him, training by Soviet specialists of Cuban nationals in handling defensive armaments was by no means offensive. And that if it were otherwise, Mr. Gromyko went on, the Soviet government would never become involved in rendering such assistance, unquote. That statement also was false. Neither the United States of America nor the world community of nations can tolerate deliberate deception and offensive threats on the part of any nation, large or small. We no longer live in a world where only the actual firing of weapons represents a sufficient challenge to a nation's security to constitute maximum peril. Nuclear weapons are so destructive and ballistic missiles are so swift that any substantially increased possibility of their use or any sudden change in their deployment may well be regarded as a definite threat to peace. For many years, both the Soviet Union and the United States, recognizing this fact, have deployed strategic nuclear weapons with great care, never upsetting the precarious status quo, which ensured that these weapons would not be used in the absence of some vital challenge. Our own strategic missiles have never been transferred to the territory of any other nation under a cloak of secrecy and deception. And our history, unlike that of the Soviets since the end of World War II, demonstrates that we have no desire to dominate or conquer any other nation or impose our system upon its people. Nevertheless, American citizens have become adjusted to living daily on the bullseye of Soviet missiles located inside the USSR or in submarines. In that sense, missiles in Cuba add to an already clear and present danger. Although it should be noted, the nations of Latin America have never previously been subjected to a potential nuclear threat. But this secret, swift, extraordinary buildup of communist missiles in an area well known to have a special and historical relationship to the United States and the nations of the Western Hemisphere, in violation of Soviet assurances and in defiance of American and hemispheric policy, this sudden, clandestine decision to station strategic weapons for the first time outside of Soviet soil is a deliberately provocative and unjustified change in the status quo, which cannot be accepted by this country if our courage and our commitments are ever to be trusted again by either friend or foe. The 1930s taught us a clear lesson. Aggressive conduct, if allowed to go unchecked and unchallenged, ultimately leads to war. This nation is opposed to war. We are also true to our word. Our unswerving objective, therefore, must be to prevent the use of these missiles against this or any other country, and to secure their withdrawal or elimination from the Western Hemisphere. Our policy has been one of patience and restraint, as befits a peaceful and powerful nation which leads a worldwide alliance. We have been determined not to be diverted from our central concerns by mere irritants and fanatics. But now further action is required, and it is underway, and these actions may only be the beginning. We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the course of worldwide nuclear war, in which even the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. But neither will we shrink from that risk at any time it must be faced. Acting, therefore, in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution, as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. First, to halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. This quarantine will be extended, if needed, to other types of cargo and carriers. We are not at this time, however, denying the necessities of life, as the Soviets attempted to do in their Berlin blockade of 1948. Second, I have directed the continued and increased close surveillance of Cuba and its military buildup. The foreign ministers of the OAS, in their communique of October 6, rejected secrecy on such matters in this hemisphere. Should these offensive military preparations continue, thus increasing the threat to the hemisphere, further action will be justified. I have directed the armed forces to prepare for any eventualities, and I trust that in the interest of both the Cuban people and the Soviet technicians at the sites, the hazards to all concerned of continuing this threat will be recognized. Third, it shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. Fourth, as a necessary military precaution, I have reinforced our base at Guantanamo, evacuated today the dependents of our personnel there, and ordered additional military units to be on a standby alert basis. Fifth, we are calling tonight for an immediate meeting of the Organization of Consultation under the Organization of American States to consider this threat to hemispheric security and to invoke Articles 6 and 8 of the Rio Treaty in support of all necessary action. The United Nations Charter allows for regional security arrangements, and the nations of this hemisphere decided long ago against the military presence of outside powers. Our other allies around the world have also been alerted. Sixth, under the Charter of the United Nations, we are asking tonight that an emergency meeting of the Security Council be convoked without delay to take action against this latest Soviet threat to world peace. Our resolution will call for the prompt dismantling and withdrawal of all offensive weapons in Cuba under the supervision of UN observers before the quarantine can be lifted. Seventh and finally, I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations. I call upon him further to abandon this course of world domination and to join in an historic effort to end the perilous arms race and to transform the history of man. He has an opportunity now to move the world back from the abyss of destruction by returning to his government's own words that it had no need to station missiles outside its own territory, and withdrawing these weapons from Cuba, by refraining from any action which will widen or deepen the present crisis, and then by participating in a search for peaceful and permanent solutions. This nation is prepared to present its case against the Soviet threat to peace and our own proposals for a peaceful world at any time and in any forum, in the OAS, in the United Nations, or in any other meeting that could be useful, without limiting our freedom of action. We have in the past made strenuous efforts to limit the spread of nuclear weapons. We have proposed the elimination of all arms and military bases in a fair and effective disarmament treaty. We are prepared to discuss new proposals for the removal of tensions on both sides, including the possibilities of a genuinely independent Cuba, free to determine its own destiny. We have no wish to war with the Soviet Union, for we are a peaceful people who desire to live in peace with all other peoples. But it is difficult to settle or even discuss these problems in an atmosphere of intimidation. That is why this latest Soviet threat, or any other threat, which is made either independently or in response to our actions this week, must and will be met with determination. Any hostile move anywhere in the world against the safety and freedom of peoples to whom we are committed, including in particular the brave people of West Berlin, will be met by whatever action is needed. Finally, I want to say a few words to the captive people of Cuba, to whom this speech is being directly carried by special radio facilities. I speak to you as a friend, as one who knows of your deep attachment to your fatherland, as one who shares your aspirations for liberty and justice for all. And I have watched, and the American people have watched, with deep sorrow, how your nationalist revolution was betrayed and how your fatherland fell under foreign domination. Now your leaders are no longer Cuban leaders, inspired by Cuban ideals. They are puppets and agents of an international conspiracy which has turned Cuba against your friends and neighbors in the Americas and turned it into the first Latin American country to become a target for nuclear war, the first Latin American country to have these weapons on its soil. These new weapons are not in your interest. They contribute nothing to your peace and well-being. They can only undermine it. But this country has no wish to cause you to suffer or to impose any system upon you. We know that your lives and land are being used as pawns by those who deny your freedom. Many times in the past, the Cuban people have risen to throw out tyrants who destroyed their liberty. And I have no doubt that most Cubans today look forward to the time when they will be truly free, free from foreign domination, free to choose their own leaders, free to select their own system, free to own their own land, free to speak and write and worship without fear or degradation. And then shall Cuba be welcomed back to the society of free nations and to the associations of this hemisphere. My fellow citizens, let no one doubt that this is a difficult and dangerous effort on which we have set out. No one can foresee precisely what course it will take, or what costs or casualties will be incurred. Many months of sacrifice and self-discipline lie ahead, months in which both our patience and our will be tested, months in which many threats and denunciations will keep us aware of our dangers. But the greatest danger of all would be to do nothing. The path we have chosen for the present is full of hazards, as all paths are. But it is the one most consistent with our character and courage as a nation and our commitments around the world. The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender or submission. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved. Thank you.
And ignominiously, with the world watching intently, Khrushchev took his missiles home. This may well have been the supreme moment of the Kennedy career. And likewise, it may have marked a turning point in history's ultimate judgment of Nikita Khrushchev. For after that, he never seemed quite so fearsome as he did before. There was another trip to Europe for the president, vigorous discussion of taxes, unemployment, and civil rights. In scores of communities, Negroes began demonstrating, and some said the president was avoiding the issue. 2 Negro youngsters applied for admission to the University of Alabama, and again the president ensured their safe conduct. He delivered a speech to the nation.
This is not a sectional issue. Difficulties over segregation and discrimination exist in every city, in every state of the Union, producing in many cities a rising tide of discontent that threatens the public safety. Nor is this a partisan issue. In a time of domestic crisis, men of goodwill and generosity should be able to unite regardless of party or politics. This is not even a legal or legislative issue alone. It is better to settle these matters in the courts than on the streets, and new laws are needed at every level. But law alone cannot make men see right. We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the Scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay? 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free. We preach freedom around the world, and we mean it. And we cherish our freedom here at home. But are we to say to the world, and much more importantly, to each other, that this is a land of the free, except for the Negroes? That we have no second-class citizens, except Negroes? That we have no class or caste system, no ghettos, no master race, except with respect to Negroes? Now the time has come for this nation to fulfill its promise. The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cries for equality that no city or state or legislative body can prudently choose to ignore them. The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every city, north and south. Where legal remedies are not at hand, redress is sought in the streets, in demonstrations, parades, and protests, which create tensions and threaten violence and threaten lives. We face, therefore, a moral crisis as a country and a people. It cannot be met by repressive police action. It cannot be left to increase demonstrations in the streets. It cannot be quieted by token moves or talk. It is a time to act in the Congress, in your state and local legislative body, and above all, in all of our daily lives. It is not enough to pin the blame on others, to say this is a problem of one section of the country or another, or deplore the facts that we face. A great change is at hand, and our task, our obligation, is to make that revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all. Those who do nothing are inviting shame as well as violence. Those who act boldly are recognizing right as well as reality. Next week, I shall ask the Congress of the United States to act, to make a commitment it has not fully made in this century, to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law. The federal judiciary has upheld that proposition in a series of forthright cases. The executive branch has adopted that proposition in the conduct of its affairs, including the employment of federal personnel. In the last 2 weeks, over 75 cities have seen progress made in desegregating these kinds of facilities. But many are unwilling to act alone. And for this reason, nationwide legislation is needed if we are to move this problem from the streets to the courts. I'm also asking Congress to authorize the federal government to participate more fully in lawsuits designed to end segregation in public education. We have succeeded in persuading many districts to desegregate voluntarily. Dozens have admitted Negroes without violence. Today, a Negro is attending a state-supported institution in every one of our 50 states. But the pace is very slow. Too many Negro children entering segregated grade schools at the time of the Supreme Court's decision 9 years ago will enter segregated high schools this fall, having suffered a loss which can never be restored. The lack of an adequate education denies the Negro a chance to get a decent job. The orderly implementation of the Supreme Court decision, therefore, cannot be left solely to those who may not have the economic resources to carry the legal action or who may be subject to harassment. Other features will be also requested, including greater protection for the right to vote. But legislation, I repeat, cannot solve this problem alone. It must be solved in the homes of every American, in every community across our country. In this respect, I want to pay tribute to those citizens north and south who've been working in their communities to make life better for all. They are acting not out of a sense of legal duty, but out of a sense of human decency. Like our soldiers and sailors in all parts of the world, they are meeting freedom's challenge on the firing line, and I salute them for their honor and their courage. My fellow Americans, this is a problem which faces us all, in every city of the North as well as the South. Today, there are Negroes unemployed 2 or 3 times as many compared to whites. Inadequate education, moving into the large cities, unable to find work, young people particularly out of work without hope, denied equal rights, denied the opportunity to eat at a restaurant or a lunch counter or go to a movie theater, denied the right to a decent education, denied almost today the right to attend a state university even though qualified. It seems to me that these are matters which concern us all, not merely presidents or congressmen or governors, but every citizen of the United States. This is one country. It has become one country because all of us and all the people who came here had an equal chance to develop their talents. We cannot say to 10% of the population that you can't have that right. Your children can't have the chance to develop whatever talents they have. That the only way that they're going to get their rights is to go in the street and demonstrate. I think we owe them and we owe ourselves a better country than that. Therefore, I'm asking for your help in making it easier for us to move ahead and to provide the kind of equality of treatment which we would want ourselves. To give a chance for every child to be educated to the limit of his talent. That the only way that they are going to get their rights is to go in the street and demonstrate. I think we owe them and we owe ourselves a better country than that. Therefore, I'm asking for your help in making it easier for us to move ahead and to provide the kind of equality of treatment which we would want ourselves. To give a chance for every child to be educated to the limit of his talent. As I've said before, not every child has an equal talent or an equal ability or equal motivation, but they should have the equal right to develop their talent and their ability and their motivation to make something of themselves. We have a right to expect that the Negro community will be responsible, will uphold the law, but they have a right to expect that the law will be fair, that the Constitution will be colorblind, as Justice Harlan said at the turn of the century. This is what we're talking about, and this is a matter which concerns this country and what it stands for. And in meeting it, I ask the support of all of our citizens.
There were frustrations over civil rights, but there were satisfactions in another field, the conquest of outer space. It was during the Kennedy administration that this nation enjoyed its first and greatest victories in space. Here is NBC News reporter Roy Neal.
Soon after John F. Kennedy took office, he began to demonstrate that he had great interest in space and did not enjoy the second-place position in which the United States found itself in some space achievements. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration was realigned on an executive level in the first year of the Kennedy administration. James Webb was made the administrator, and the then Vice President, Lyndon Johnson, as head of the National Aeronautics and Space Council, began to take an active and direct interest in the national programs. At that time, President Kennedy made the first of what was to be a continuing series of speeches and statements describing the need, as he put it, to chart the uncharted oceans of space and set the national goal to send a man to the moon and bring him safely back. Since then, his program is well illustrated by the funds he was able to obtain for its support. In 1961, Alan Shepard made the first suborbital flight from Cape Canaveral. The president had the astronaut come to Washington to address a joint session of Congress. The Space Administration's budget was passed shortly thereafter at a record $1.4 billion. The following year, 1962, when John Glenn's flight was delayed, President Kennedy summoned the astronaut to the White House. Glenn told me later that that session was devoted to no other purpose than that the president wanted to reassure him of continuing support. After Glenn did fly, President Kennedy paid a personal visit to Canaveral. To those of us who were there, it was obvious that he enjoyed being part of the space age. Glenn, too, was brought back to Washington for a joint session of Congress, and now, under White House guidance, the space budget jumped to $3.75 billion. Glenn became a national hero and a personal friend of the Kennedys. On more than one occasion since, all 7 of the original astronauts have been invited visitors to the White House. This year, for the first time, Mr. Kennedy ran into trouble getting approval for a still further increased space budget, over $5 billion. His recent actions proved again his continuing support. They have included another personal visit to Cape Canaveral last weekend and to the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, and a whole series of speeches which put him squarely on record selling the space programs. President Kennedy believed a great deal could be accomplished in space on a cooperative basis with Russia. In a recent speech before the United Nations, he proposed a cooperative manned moon flight with the Soviets. Now, that speech created a problem for the men who backed the space budget, but it also reflected his belief in the need to keep space for peaceful purposes. There is, of course, much more to space technology than manned flight. During the Kennedy administration, there's been an instrument flight to the planet Venus, and communication satellites have begun to transmit television between the continents. By coincidence, today was the first day for television transmission via relay satellite from the United States to Japan. Mr. Kennedy had recorded a short statement at the White House for that first telecast. It was not transmitted because of his death, but it reflects his estimation of the importance of space-age technology.
Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a good deal of pleasure through this first television transmission, the orbiting satellite relay, to extend a very warm greeting to the people of Japan, that we're able to speak simultaneously across the Pacific, which has appeared to many as a barrier rather than as a bridge, indicates how shrinking our world is and how important it is that we establish the most intimate relations between Japan and the United States, between Japan and the United States and other countries of the world. We've been attempting in recent months and recent years to make those ties more intimate. We met last May in Japan to discuss how our scientific communities could work more closely together. We met here in Washington with some of your leading scholars to discuss how we could have a greater understanding of our cultural traditions, there in Japan, here in the United States. And now at this time, they're meeting in Japan to taking part on the economic study of trade and economic progress, a group of cabinet officers from the United States who are returning a visit of your cabinet officers who came here to the White House a year ago. In all these ways, we are working to strengthen the ties of friendship between Japan and the United States, ties of understanding. And I hope this quick communication by satellite many thousands of miles away from us all will be a means of making our people live more closely together, bringing peace to them. To the people of Japan, I send the best wishes of the people of the United States for happiness, for prosperity, and for peace. Thank you.
That was a recorded statement of greetings to the people of Japan to be broadcast and transmitted today by relay satellite to the people of Japan. The broadcast was canceled because of the president's death. So far, Lee Oswald has only been accused of killing a Dallas policeman. As far as the assassination is concerned, he is described only as a prime suspect. He has denied any knowledge of the assassination of the president. Although he once actually turned in his American passport in Moscow, it's not known whether he actually became a Russian citizen. His wife is known to be Russian-born. They most recently lived in a rooming house in Dallas. Again, he was arrested in New Orleans last August after he got into a fight while distributing material for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Here is the interview he gave at that time to station WDSU-TV in New Orleans.
No, sir, I'm not a communist, and I think that the red herring and so forth is rather ridiculous to toss into this conversation.
Then are you a Marxist?
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Well, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
What is the difference between the two?
Well, there's a great deal of difference. Several American parties in several countries are based on Marxism, such as Ghana. Certain countries have characteristics of a socialist system, such as Great Britain with its socialized medicine. These, then, are the differences between an outright communist country and countries which adhere to leftist or Marxist principles.
In your work with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, what are you advocating?
We advocate restoration of diplomatic, trade, and tourist relations with Cuba.
The president was a family man, and his wife was among his most valuable political assets. The Kennedys were married while he was still a senator, but Mrs. Kennedy never really got accustomed to traveling the political circuit. It was, therefore, a little unusual that she went with him on this two-day swing through Texas. This morning, when they arrived in Dallas, the people there got a glimpse of the president as a family man. Here is a report from Robert McNeil at station WBAP, Fort Worth.
The president began the day by playing with much enjoyment the role of the husband of Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy. The first act of the day was a short walk in the rain to a crowd across from the hotel, a spirited speech, and a reference to his wife that delighted the people and set a gay tone for the whole morning.
I appreciate your being here this morning. Mrs. Kennedy is organizing herself to take a logger. That's because she looks better than we do.
The president was in his best form, looking refreshed after a good night's sleep, reveling in the crisp morning, and invigorated by his reception. There was more cheering and handshaking inside the hotel, where the president attended a Chamber of Commerce breakfast. But as all the people on the platform were introduced, there were more and more whispers of, "Where is Jackie?" Mrs. Kennedy, in fact, was waiting outside the room for a cue to enter. It was she many came to see, and finally they did. Resplendent in a pink suit and pillbox hat, Mrs. Kennedy made an entrance in keeping with the new image she'd revealed during the Texas trip. It had been her first participation in a domestic political trip since the 1960 campaign. It obviously delighted the president to have her blossom into an appreciation of the political life she shrank from previously. At each stop, Mrs. Kennedy had been as forward as the president in shaking hands. Some had called her the president's secret weapon for 1964. Watching her entrance this morning, a White House official described it as tactical. It looked as though there would be a lot of scenes like this in the future. The feuding in the Texas Democratic Party, which had preoccupied the statewide press for the visit, was not able to distract the rank and file from the glamour of having the president and his wife to visit.
Ladies and gentlemen, I proudly present the President of the United States.
It was the kind of occasion John Kennedy had delighted in before, and his mind went back to a day as sunny and brilliant as this one in Texas. A day in Paris 2.5 years ago, when the freshness of this American couple took the French by storm.
I know now why everyone in Texas, Fort Worth, is so thin, having gotten up and down about 9 times. This is what you do every morning. Mr. Buck, Mr. Vice President, Governor Conley, Senator Yarborough, Jim Wright, members of the congressional delegation, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Attorney General, ladies and gentlemen. 2 years ago, I said that, introduced myself in Paris by saying that I was the man who had accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris. I'm getting somewhat that same sensation as I travel around Texas.
This afternoon and this evening, there have been many expressions of shock and regret and sympathy from various heads of state. Within the past hour, the Prime Minister of the Dominion of Canada, Lester Pearson, spoke on television to the people of his country. His comments on the murder of President Kennedy were carried in English and French. Here on videotape is the Prime Minister of Canada as he appeared on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
No tragedy. And there are millions of people tonight who, throughout the world, will feel that they have lost a friend. President Kennedy was young. He was a man of courage in war and in peace. He devoted himself to public service. He worked unselfishly for the public good as he saw it. He has paid for this public service with his life. For the President, it was death on duty. When a free man falls courageously in action, all freedom grieves. But courage is made easier for others. When a young man and a good man is stricken, we all feel a little older. But we have a deeper resolve to be better ourselves. At this sad moment, I think of what the loss of the President means to his country, to this hemisphere, and to the world. This young man, with the vigor and decisiveness of his years and his character, but with wisdom and experience beyond those years. But above all, I think tonight of his wife, for whom this has been a very dark year, and of his family. I have sent to her and to the family our deep and heartfelt sympathy. Canadians will share her grief as we share the sense of loss of the American people in the loss of their president. To us in Canada, President Kennedy was a special friend. He stood for those things for which most of us in Canada have deep sympathy. He stood for understanding and good relations between his own country and ours. Mr. Kennedy was always firm and straightforward in expressing the viewpoint of his own country. But he was always understanding of the viewpoint of Canada. He was a man of generous mind, of generous instinct. He had a quality of mind and a quality of spirit far surpassing the usual quality even of men who become the leaders of great nations. I had a warm and understanding friendship with Mr. Kennedy, and I feel that I have lost a friend. It was a relationship that went beyond the official, and I shall miss him very much. Only a few weeks ago, he asked me if I could spend with him an evening and speak with him at the annual dinner of the Kennedy Foundation for Mental Health. My wife and I were looking forward to an informal visit with Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy at that time. And now he has been cut down. In his death, I dare to believe he has united men of goodwill with a closer, more personal realization of their common concern, of their mutual involvement than they had before. That is the measure of the breadth of his own concern. His death, then, is a tragedy not only for his own country, but for the world, because it was for the peace and freedom and welfare of people all over the world that he fought so courageously and so well. He was the leader of the richest and most powerful country in history. He came himself from among its richest, but he was always deeply concerned with the poor and the oppressed, with the sick and the needy. His appeal was not to the comfortable, but to the daring. Listen to these words from his inaugural address in Washington nearly 3 years ago. This is what he said then. Now the trumpet summons us again, not as a call to battle, though embattled we are, but a call to bear the burden of a long twilight struggle year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. These words were the measure of that man. For him, the burden has now been lifted. But for us, that trumpet still sounds. There is a mystery in a tragedy of this kind that we cannot easily or fully understand. But as we lament the tragedy, we are grateful for the President's life and for his work, for the service that he gave, and for the way he prepared himself for that service, and for the courage he has shown in discharging it. May he rest in the peace that he has earned, and may God comfort those close to him in this hour of sadness and desolation.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have just heard the Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Lester B. Pearson.
President Lyndon Johnson, which is a title that'll take a little getting used to, has called a meeting at the White House just now with the members of the leadership of Congress in both parties. Those who are there have already arrived are the Senate Majority Leader, Mike Mansfield, the Senate Majority Whip, Hubert Humphrey, Senator William Fulbright, Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senate Republican Leader Everett Dirksen, the House Speaker John McCormick, and the House Minority Leader Charles Halleck. Ray Scherer of NBC News has an interview with a correspondent who, in the airplane today, watched the swearing-in of President Lyndon Johnson.
Correspondent for Newsweek magazine, he flew back with President Johnson from Texas and can tell us what it was like at the swearing-in.
Well,
We rushed out to the airport when we found that President Kennedy's body was being taken out there. On arrival, we learned that President Johnson was aboard the plane. His movements had been kept very secret up to that time. And 3 of us were delegated as a pool to go aboard and witness the swearing in. We were ushered back to the conference room on Air Force One, which is a small section of the plane about midship, 12 by 15. There were, at that time, about 10 people in the conference room. The new president was standing there with his wife and was waiting for Mrs. Kennedy, who had come aboard with her husband's body, to come to the conference room so that she could witness the swearing in. During that period that we waited, they found a Bible aboard the plane. Someone had typed out on a little piece of Air Force stationery the oath that is administered to the president. And
where did the lady judge come from who gave the oath?
The judge arrived there at about the same time we did.
She was sent for?
She was sent for. She's an old a friend and political ally of the vice president, and she's 67 years old. I understand that the vice president had exerted great pressure on Mr. Kennedy to appoint her, although she was over age.
Well, how did it go then?
Eventually, Mrs. Kennedy came into the room, and although she was, her legs were still spattered with blood, she was amazingly composed. She was either in shock or has amazing control of herself. And the vice president then asked his wife, Lady Bird, to stand on his right and Mrs. Kennedy to stand on his left. The judge held this small Bible out, and the new president put his hand on the Bible, raised his right hand, and repeated the oath. The president then turned and kissed Lady Bird. Lady Bird stepped forward and shook hands with Mrs. Kennedy and said, "The whole nation mourns your husband." And at this point, many people, I'd say there were about 27 people in this tiny compartment, pressed forward to speak to the president. Most of it was on the line, "God be with you," of course.
That was how President Johnson was sworn in aboard an aircraft. You've been listening to Charles Roberts, White House correspondent for Newsweek magazine. Ray Scherer, NBC News, at the White House.
Mrs. Kennedy, it is worth saying, on one horrible day, has been magnificent. The funeral arrangements are these. The place of burial is not yet announced, but it perhaps will be in the family burial plot in Brookline, Massachusetts. The body will lie in the White House tomorrow, and there is a schedule for those who will come in and pass by. Beginning with the family at 10 a.m., then on through the new president, the speaker, officers of the executive branch, then the Supreme Court, the judiciary, Congress, governors, and the diplomatic corps. Later, for 24 hours, beginning at noon on Sunday, the president's body will lie in state in the rotunda of the United States Capitol, the great vaulting open area under the dome. He was president for 2 years, 10 months, and 2 days, and then was murdered. Some of the memories of him that people in Washington and elsewhere will keep include those of the most youthful president we ever had, who changed the whole atmosphere in the White House and to some extent in this whole town. Most presidents have been older men, their children grown up and their grandchildren about, and the presidents generally have carried some of the sedateness of age in the manner and gesture of a settled maturity. But the White House under Mr. Kennedy had a nursery school upstairs, rag dolls lying around all over, and the atmosphere of youth, energy, noise, exuberance, sometimes more of it than some people really liked. But in any case, there was always the feeling of a young, vigorous man, impatient to get things done, impatient with delay, delighted to be president. None of those lugubrious little comments we have heard from other presidents like, well, the White House is a prison and so on. And even more delighted to be out on the road on a political campaign, which is where he was when he was murdered. Beyond that, any kind of assessment or evaluation at this stage would be foolish and impossible. But it is possible to say he was a young man who knew everything that was going on everywhere. He had the modern man's devotion to facts and figures, not too much patience with emotional responses to anything, and generally held to the philosophy summed up in the familiar phrase of a few years ago, "Just give us the facts, ma'am." Well, the fact now is that Lyndon Johnson is President of the United States, and to some extent anyway, he no doubt will carry on with the policies started by President Kennedy. Of course, the discretion is his, both as to policies and personnel. All members of the cabinet and all other presidential appointees from Secretary of State Rusk on down will be expected now to submit their resignations. And these resignations will be of two kinds. One kind may be a real one, meaning I am not willing to serve any longer. It is possible that for personal or some other reason, some members of the cabinet may not want to serve with anyone other than Mr. Kennedy. But the other kind is a formal one submitted for the President's convenience, for him to accept or reject as he pleases. It's a courtesy, actually, making it possible for the new President to change his cabinet without having to be embarrassed by asking anyone to resign. This, of course, is sheer guesswork, but I would guess that Mr. Johnson, at least for a while, would ask all of Mr. Kennedy's appointees to stay. Because however stunned everyone is, including him, the country has to go on and the government has to go on, and it can go on only if those in position of trust and responsibility stay. So we would guess that all of them will, because it is their duty to do so, to stay there as long as the new president wants them, until he has had time to make whatever changes he decides he wants. Because, of course, the new president has the right and the duty to execute his office as he sees fit. In normal circumstances, had he been elected, he would have had several weeks from November to January, and in fact before that, to make his plans and to choose a cabinet. But Mr. Johnson now has been thrust into office without notice or warning, not even a day or an hour. So again, he really has no choice immediately but to carry on with the administration, the cabinet, the advisors chosen by Mr. Kennedy. Gradually, if he cares to, and as he cares to, he will make changes and set up an administration of his own. The last time this happened, of course, was when President Roosevelt died suddenly of a stroke and Vice President Truman came into the White House. Now it's President Lyndon Johnson, and what has happened today has happened to all of us. NBC News, incidentally, will be on the air all night, continuously, bringing you whatever news there is. Here, again, on videotape are President Johnson's first public words as president. They were spoken at Andrews Air Force Base when he flew back to Washington on the same airplane with Mrs. Kennedy, who, again, I may say, has been magnificent, on the same airplane with her and the body of her late husband.
It's a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God's.